Hi, Namaste Yogi. It's nice to see you. Um, I am coming on the Zoom video conference because I'm going to be doing some screen shares with you tonight of my course, currently titled Breath by Breath, Immerse into Yourself with an Inspired Yoga Posture Practice Every Time You Take the Mat. And I might be changing that title. I'm working on it. But anyway, that's the current name. So I want to share with you really sort of the meat and potatoes of the course tonight. This is really, I believe it's my second Facebook call. I'll put the link up to that call. I talked about how I had an awakening experience when I was 19 years old. And I talked about what that awakening experience felt like. And then about a year later, I started practicing yoga. I took a course. I was in college and when all these things happened, I took a course in yoga. And that was the first time that I was ever able to go into that altered state of consciousness, not really deliberately, like I couldn't make myself go into it. But what I found was that I was more likely to be in at least some mild state like I had been when I was in that awakening moment right after I practiced yoga. And so, since it was so clear to me during that moment of awakening that I needed to be in that state as often as possible, then I started to see yoga as my path. That's why I've always been practicing yoga, why it has always been my main practice to be a yogi. Even though there's been other practices that really interested me, I just knew that I was meant to teach yoga and have focused on that all my life. So I'm going to be showing you now some of the key teachings from this. And the first thing I'm going to be doing is just describing what that state is like. And then I'm going to be skipping into some of the information from one of the later courses to show you really what it's about, because I think a lot of people here will be interested in that material the most. But it's all presented in a very structured way in the course. I'll talk a little bit about what every person at every level will get from it at the end of the call. Let me do my screen share the slides with you. Here we go. Breath by breath, immerse into yourself with an inspired yoga posture practice every time you take the mat. And I'm going to be reading out some of the narration. So can you recall ever being totally focused on what you were doing in such a way that time seemed to fall away? All of us experience these moments. A lot of people find these moments when they're exercising. Sometimes it happens when you're out in nature or you're just really engaged in a task. You just get lost in a good way, engrossed in what you were doing. When you lose track of time like this, there's a sense of ease in your body. You feel at home in your own body. When these peaceful moments come to us, the feeling is of being at place in the world and of being a part of the world. This is really what I'm describing as, happened so intensely during my awakening experience, but it's something that I think everyone has experienced in their life, and in some small measure or a larger measure for those who've really focused on practices of mindfulness. The usual feeling of isolation and separation dissolves. It's a state of happiness and contentment. When we enter these fleeting states of timeless immersion in the present, we take a new tone with ourselves. Most people talk to themselves in a critical voice most of the time. But during these moments, things change and we can become removed from our thoughts, observing them without judging them. It's a tone of kindness and compassion. In yoga, we call this a witness consciousness, and many other meditation traditions talk about this form of consciousness where you take a sense of distance from yourself. It's a kind of scientific observation on your own self, free of judgment. Many people experience these sensations of being lost in time, a part of the whole, and taking a witness consciousness when they practice yoga. Whether they take hot yoga or some kind of really exercisey form of yoga, whether they're doing slow yoga, laying on the floor yoga, it doesn't matter, but people return to it over and over again, chasing these moments of connection to their deepest selves. So I'm going to teach in the course how to deliberately create this feeling of connection to yourself when you practice, so that it happens, so that instead of it just being an experience that sometimes happens and sometimes doesn't, and sometimes is deep and sometimes is sort of weak, that it becomes a feeling that you can return to over and over again every single time that you hit the mat. I call this approach the Zeno's paradox approach, and I'm going to talk to you about why it's called that, who Zeno is in a moment. So I used to think that if I just practiced enough, if I got good enough, that eventually this sense of being always in the present moment would just happen. Like I thought that if I practiced long enough and hard enough that it would sort of naturally happen, where I would stay in this wonderful state of blissful connection to self from the beginning of the practice to the end. And spoiler alert, that like never ever happened. So who was Zeno and what does this have to do with the solution that I found to this problem? Well, that's him over on the left. He's a pre-Socratic philosopher, and he was famous for several paradoxes. Pre-Socratic just means that he was a philosopher before the time of Socrates. So one of his really famous paradoxes was called the dichotomy paradox. The dichotomy paradox is about a race. If a runner wants to reach the finish line, first he has to run halfway. And to get to that halfway point, though, first he has to get halfway to that halfway point, which is a quarter of the way. But to get a quarter of the way, first he has to go halfway to that point, which is an eighth of the way. And you can see what's happening here. You should really never be able to get to the end, because every single distance can be divided mathematically. Well, the thing is that we do complete races, and that's really the paradox. You shouldn't mathematically be able to do it according to his method of division, but we actually do complete races. However, his paradox really points out to this like key thing that you need to know to practice yoga in the way that I'm describing consistently, which is that every single point in time can be divided infinitely. And so there's always a moment there. No matter how long your practice is, you can divide it into discrete points infinitely. You know, there's always another point there to pay attention to. So over the course of an entire yoga practice, so you can see, if you were to continuously sustain the feeling of being immersed in your breathing, then at any discrete point, at any discrete moment, you would be totally present to your breath. So this Zeno's paradox approach is to consciously observe the quality of your breath as many times as possible. That way, if you notice your breathing is ragged, or that you are holding your breath, or doing anything to restrict the free movement of breathing, you can, without judgment, quickly return to a more relaxed and energized state. And so you probably won't be able to create of this flowing feeling of always being in the present. But what you can do is you can get to it consciously more and more and more and more and more. You can start to be aware of when you're not there, and then return back to it as many times as possible. So this approach of returning continuously to a point of focus over and over again, it's used in many, many different meditation practices and mindfulness practices. But the trick is to be very kind to yourself, because it is natural for your attention to drift away from the present moment. And then to practice coming back over and over and over again to the present moment is a practice of being kind to yourself, of not being angry with yourself. So every moment that you return, it's a moment where you get to practice being kind for the fact that you're not doing it, quote, right. It's okay. This is actually just natural for your attention to drift. Just return back again without judgment. Begin again. So now let me talk about the nitty-gritty of how you really do it. So in the course, I've actually been secretly teaching this already, because I've been having the participants, the learners, return back to this prayer position over and over again before and after performing postures. And so it's not really spelled out that that's what's happening. It's just already been introduced in the content before, that they've been doing this. And so now I surprise them. You've been doing it all along. You've been checking in with your breathing before you start a pose and when you end a pose. And these are the first points where you consciously check in. Now I'm showing you, this is how you do it. These are the places you check in before and after a pose. So then anytime that you connect with your torso, and early in the course showing how the big movements of breathing can be felt in your torso, both the front and the back. And so when you're in a posture like extended child's pose shown here, or child's pose, or any pose where your torso is connecting with another part of your body, that makes it a great chance to observe your breathing, because you can feel the movement of your torso in that pose. So besides child's pose, which we've done earlier in the course, you can do it in a forward bend if your torso happens to touch your knees in a forward bend, and or touch your legs. And I personally like to emphasize that touching part over the stretching your hamstrings part that people seem to love so much about forward bends. It's really not that healthy to overextend your hamstrings anyway. And I think that being able to feel your breathing is far more important. You also can do it in the lunge, which is part of the sun salutation being taught in the course, as well as in prayer hands, which is another position where anytime that I'm in that position, I'm really deliberately creating that connection to my torso. So really secretly, that prayer hands position used before and after doing a pose is another way of creating that connection to the torso. And then there's also these chat opportunities to connect with the torso at the back. So reverse prayer hands is one position. And then also shoulder stand is another one where you're really in touch with the back of your body. And there's other postures where you connect with the back of your body. They tend to be a little bit more advanced. It's not as comfortable for people to do it. But these are also opportunities to really notice the feeling of your body moving as you breathe. Now I'm going to tell you a little bit about what people learn from this course. It's designed for yogis of any level, but if the learner is brand new to yoga, then they're going to learn how to perform a sun salutation. And one of the reasons this course is based around the sun salutation is that it's like very commonly taught in yoga classes. I want people who are maybe practicing at home but aren't quite brave enough yet to go to class to get up the courage to go to class, because that's where you really learn. So if you feel like, oh, I'm going to go to class and everybody's going to know stuff, it's true. You don't really know what's going to be taught in a yoga class, but almost certainly they're going to teach us sun salutation. So I think if you can know one cold, it helps you to feel more comfortable coming into class. That way you feel like you know something, there's something that's familiar that's happening there, and you're just more likely to stay if you're not feeling so out of place. The other thing is that the sun salutation is just a kind of easy thing to remember, practice along with, and there's videos that are included with this that can be your whole complete practice that you can do over and over again. You can shuffle up the videos to make a longer practice, a shorter practice. And these are, it can be a little beginning yoga practice for somebody who's new to yoga. They could just simply take this course and everything that they would need is in there. The most important thing though is that they're going to learn what really the point of yoga is. They may not really be able to apply these things like these Zena points early on if they're just starting out. But the thing is that they know that that's the point to get there, and they're going to be able to get there so much faster than me. It took me so many years to put all this information together. So now, what if you're already practicing yoga? Well, this is basically like the perfect course for somebody who's been practicing yoga for a little while, because a lot of people have had experience of going to class, having those wonderful feelings, and then not having a teacher talk about it. Now I'm going to just be taking everything you've been learning and put it all together for you. You will learn how to do a sun salutation really beautifully in a flowing manner. You're not going to be a beginner with it anymore. And actually, it's pretty hard to actually do a sun salutation in a really beautiful flowing way. The advanced practitioners will also be learning something. You're going to learn how to sustain postures for long periods of time without creating unnecessary strain. So I never say the word hold when I talk about yoga postures, because the yoga postures should not be held static. Your body is always moving as you breathe, and I'm going to be teaching you how to remain in a posture for a long period of time, and allow those movements of breathing to persist, to focus on them, to release the strain out of that experience of breathing, and use that whole experience to really sustain poses for long periods of time, not hold them static, which really dampens down the natural movements of breathing and makes it very difficult to sustain the pose for long periods of time. And I will be showing that specifically in the downward facing dog. So anyway, I hope everybody really liked this preview. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm at the end. Watch for that course to be released in the next month. By the end of June is my goal, with hopefully everything going smoothly toward that. And I hope that you enjoyed this. I'm very curious to hear what you think about it all. This is what I've been working on. It's material that I've been putting together for so many years. And I'm just very, very excited to see what people might be thinking about it all. So please comment, please let me know what you think. And I'm looking forward to having the whole complete course out so that people can really see it all laid out in sequence and practice on their own. Thanks, bye.